The chandeliers glittered like 1,000 diamonds above the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom, reflecting the city's luxury and cruelty in the same breath. Grace Monroe stood near the marble pillar, her hand instinctively resting on her 6-month belly. The baby kicked softly, like a silent plea not to crumble. Around her, champagne glasses clinked, laughter floated through the air, and camera flashes painted everything gold. Then she saw him. Cole Harrington, her husband, her world once, stepped onto the stage in a tailored black Armani suit. His Rolex caught the light as he wrapped an arm around a stunning blonde in a silver gown. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice smooth as ice, "I want you to meet someone very special, Sloane Avery, our new PR director." The crowd murmured. Sloane leaned in, kissing him on the cheek as photographers cheered. Grace's vision blurred. For weeks, she had heard whispers about Sloane, but tonight, in front of Manhattan's elite, those whispers became knives. Cole looked out over the crowd, pretending not to see her. Then he said the words that would tear her apart. "My wife Grace couldn't make it tonight," he laughed lightly. "She's delicate these days. Not everyone's cut out for this kind of pressure." Laughter rippled. A few heads turned toward her. Some pitied, others smirked. Grace's throat tightened, her pulse roaring in her ears. The humiliation was a living thing, hot, choking, merciless. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble, but she couldn't. She stood frozen as Cole toasted with Sloane, as if erasing his wife from existence. Natalie Cruz, her best friend and corporate lawyer, rushed toward her. "Grace, come on, let's go," she whispered urgently. But Grace couldn't move until Cole's next sentence struck like thunder. "Grace was just a charity project," he said casually, raising his glass. "But we all outgrow certain things." The crowd gasped. Someone's phone camera caught her face, pale and trembling. She turned, nearly stumbling, clutching her purse as Natalie guided her out. The flashbulbs followed like vultures. Outside, the February wind of Fifth Avenue hit her like reality. She sat in the back seat of the black Mercedes that Cole's assistant had ordered, staring blankly at her reflection in the tinted window. The Manhattan skyline shimmered like a cruel dream beyond the glass. Her iPhone buzzed in her clutch. A number she didn't recognize glowed on the screen. "Mrs. Harrington?" a deep voice said when she hesitated to answer. "This is Jasper Flint. I was your mother's attorney. I think you need to know something about your husband and a trust your mother left behind." Grace froze. "My mother's trust?" she whispered. "Yes," Jasper said quietly. "And it concerns you and him. I believe tonight changes everything." The call ended, leaving only the hum of the city and the heartbeat under her hand. Grace wiped her tears, unaware that this single phone call would soon dismantle her husband's empire and rewrite her fate. The next morning, the winter sun over Manhattan looked pale and cruel, as if it had forgotten how to warm anyone. Grace sat by the window of her small apartment in Queens, her hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. Her phone lay on the table, still showing the number from last night, Jasper Flint. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Cole's face on that stage, the glimmer in his eyes when he called her a charity project. It wasn't just humiliation, it was betrayal carved deep into her bones. When Jasper called again, she didn't hesitate this time. "Mr. Flint," she said, her voice hoarse. "Grace," he replied kindly. "I'm sorry we had to meet this way. Your mother, Dr. Evelyn Monroe, trusted me to contact you only under specific circumstances, if your well-being was ever threatened by your spouse." Grace blinked. "What does my mother have to do with Cole?" "Everything," Jasper said. Papers rustled through the phone. Before she passed, she created something called the Monroe Health Trust. At first glance, it looked like a medical charity, but within that trust, she secured a set of silent shares tied to early funding Cole received before his first big deal. That money, though anonymous at the time, came from the trust. Grace frowned. "You mean my mother helped him build his company?" "Yes, and she put in a clause," Jasper continued, "that if her beneficiary, meaning you, were ever publicly humiliated, betrayed, or emotionally endangered by the recipient, meaning your husband, the trust gains the right to reclaim 22% of his holdings." The words hung in the air like thunder. Grace's heart pounded. "You're saying I own part of his empire?" "Not yet," Jasper said carefully. "But last night, in front of the press, He fulfilled every condition that activates your claim. We have the gala footage, multiple witnesses, and news outlets already quoting his words. You have leverage, Grace, but it must be used wisely. One wrong move and he'll bury this under a mountain of legal tricks. She stood up, staring at the skyline outside her window, the Empire State Building distant but steady. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of power return. What do you want me to do? Meet me at my office on Park Ave Avenue at 10 tomorrow, Jasper said. And tell no one, especially not your husband. After the call ended, Grace sank into her couch. Her pulse was still racing. The trust, the clause, her mother's foresight, it all felt unreal. Evelyn Monroe had always been quiet, gentle, but strategic in ways her daughter never understood until now. She opened her old MacBook Air and searched Harrington Capital Scandal. Dozens of gossip headlines from last night filled the screen. Her humiliation had gone viral. For Cole, it was another PR storm he could spin. For her, it was evidence. Natalie's name popped up on her screen. You okay, G? Grace typed back slowly, no. But maybe I will be. That evening, Cole called. She let it ring. His message followed, dripping with false concern. Grace, stop being dramatic. The press twisted everything. You know I didn't mean it like that. Let's talk when you calm down. She stared at the message until her vision blurred again, but this time from rage, not heartbreak. She saved the voicemail. Evidence, she thought. Every word mattered now. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a small photo. Her mother standing in front of the old clinic she built. You knew, didn't you, Mom? She whispered. Outside, the city buzzed, taxis honking under the gray sky. Grace looked down at her belly, feeling another gentle kick. I'm not scared anymore, she whispered to her baby. He took my pride last night, but tomorrow we start taking it back. She didn't know it yet, but the trust her mother left would soon turn from paper into power, and the quiet woman Cole had mocked would rise against him in ways he never imagined. That night, sleep was a luxury Grace couldn't afford. The ceiling above her flickered with the reflection of streetlights, and every shadow seemed to whisper memories she wished she could erase. She used to believe her marriage was built on love, trust, and late-night laughter. But looking back, it had been crumbling for a long time. Cole Harrington was never just her husband. He was an empire in a suit. When she met him 6 years ago at a medical charity event in Soho, he was charming, intense, the kind of man who made promises sound like poetry. Back then, Grace was a nurse trainee volunteering for the clinic her mother founded. She admired his confidence, his talk of changing the world through technology and finance. He made her believe they were building something meaningful, together. But after the wedding, things began to shift, almost invisibly. The private dinners turned into boardroom meetings. The laughter was replaced by deadlines. Cole began to control every small detail. What she wore to events, who she spoke to, even the charities she was allowed to support. You represent me, he used to say. You can't afford mistakes. At first, Grace excused it as stress. Then came the subtle cruelty. He would forget her birthday, skip her doctor's appointments, leave her waiting in restaurants while he closed urgent deals. He said he wanted to protect her from the media, but really, he wanted to hide her. When she told him she was pregnant, his reaction wasn't joy, it was calculation. We'll need to plan the announcement, he said, typing something on his MacBook Pro without looking up. Pregnancy photos can damage the company's public image if timed wrong. That night, she cried quietly on the balcony of their Park Avenue penthouse, watching the cold glitter of the Manhattan skyline. Now, sitting in her Queens apartment, she saw every red flag for what it was: control dressed as love. The flowers, the designer jewelry, the public displays of affection, all distractions from the cracks beneath. She had been too hopeful, too forgiving. Her eyes wandered to the framed ultrasound photo on the nightstand. Her baby's heartbeat was the only sound that ever made her feel safe anymore. She whispered, "You deserve better. We both do." Grace opened her MacBook again, scrolling through old emails, photos, and text messages. Anything that could help Jasper build her case. Every word felt like peeling off another layer of denial. She found messages from Cole to Sloan, dated months back. The tone was unmistakable, intimate, mocking, and filled with contempt for her. "She'll never fight back," one message said. "She thinks marriage is a sanctuary." Her stomach twisted, but she didn't cry. Not anymore. She screenshot everything, stored it on an encrypted drive, and labeled the folder simply, Freedom. Around midnight, Natalie texted her, "Can I come by tomorrow?" Grace hesitated, then typed, "Yes. I'll explain everything." The night air seeped in through the cracked window. She wrapped herself in a shawl, glancing at the empty side of her bed where Cole used to sleep. The silence was heavy, but it no longer scared her. It felt clean, like the air after a storm. In the reflection of the glass, she barely recognized herself. Her eyes were darker, steadier. The woman staring back wasn't the naive wife from the gala. She was someone reborn from ashes. Grace didn't know it yet, but by morning, her quiet determination would set in motion a chain of events that would shake Cole's empire from its foundations, and the cracks in their marriage would soon become fault lines of power. The following morning, Manhattan shimmered under a thin sheet of snow. Grace stepped out of a yellow cab in front of a tall glass building on Park Avenue. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed her coat tighter around her belly. The brass plaque beside the entrance read, "Flint and Rowe, Attorneys at Law." Inside, everything gleamed: mahogany walls, framed certificates, the faint scent of leather and old paper. Jasper Flint stood at the end of the hallway, tall and gray-haired, with the calm presence of someone who had seen too much and judged too little. "Grace," he greeted her warmly, gesturing toward the conference room. "You look like your mother when she was about to change the world." Grace smiled faintly, taking a seat across from him. The table was neatly arranged with folders, flash drives, and a silver Mont Blanc pen that caught the morning light. Jasper opened the first folder. "This," he said, "is the bridge loan Cole received 8 years ago to launch Harrington Capital." What he didn't know is that the funds were partially backed by the Monroe Health Trust through a shell donor. "Your mother's doing." Grace leaned forward, scanning the documents. "So the money that built his company came from her?" "Yes," Jasper said. "And your mother wasn't naive. She had the foresight to tie moral conditions to that funding. If Cole ever engaged in conduct that publicly humiliated or emotionally endangered you, the trust could reclaim 22% of his shares." He tapped a page. "Clause 12B, Forfeiture of Moral Standing." Grace stared at the words. They looked cold and simple, but they carried the weight of justice. "Can we actually enforce it?" "We can," Jasper said, "if we have evidence that meets 3 standards: public humiliation, breach of marital loyalty, and willful emotional harm." Last night's gala provided all 3. News outlets have archived the footage. Social media's flooded with clips. Cole's arrogance handed us the proof. Grace took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the edge of the table. "Then what happens next?" "We prepare a quiet notice to the board's 2 senior members," Jasper explained. "They're old-school men, care more about reputation than profit. If they see risk of scandal, they'll push for an internal review. That gives us leverage to activate the clause without filing a messy lawsuit." He slid a USB drive toward her. "Inside are scanned copies of the original trust deed, notarized by me and your mother. Keep it safe. And Grace," he paused, "once this begins, Cole will fight like a cornered animal. You can't let him see your fear." Grace nodded, swallowing hard. "I won't." Just then the door opened. Natalie Cruz walked in, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Her sharp navy suit contrasted with Grace's soft beige coat. "I came as soon as I got your text," she said, setting down her iPad. "And before you ask, yes, I'm all in." Grace blinked. "All in?" Natalie smirked. "I've handled corporate takeovers nastier than this. And if your husband thinks he can crush you with his lawyers, he's about to meet someone who doesn't blink." Jasper smiled approvingly. "Good. Then we're a team." They spent the next hour reviewing timelines, transaction ledgers, and digital evidence. Natalie pulled up screenshots Grace had saved, the text messages, the PR emails, the private correspondence with Sloan. Every file added another layer to the case. By the time they finished, Grace felt both exhausted and alive. For the first time, she wasn't reacting, she was planning. Jasper stood, handing her a final envelope. "Send nothing, post nothing. Let him believe you're broken. Silence is the sharpest weapon." Grace rose, slipping the envelope into her bag. Outside, the city wind cut through her coat, but she didn't shiver. A reflection in the glass doors showed someone new. Still fragile, but dangerous in her quietness. She walked down Park Avenue, unaware that by nightfall, Cole's empire would already begin to feel the first tremor of her silent revenge. 2 days later, the scandal had grown teeth. Every gossip site from New York to Los Angeles carried headlines about the pregnant wife and the billionaire's secret. Cole Harrington was furious. He had spent years building his image as the brilliant, self-made mogul with a perfect life. Now, one careless night at the plaza had cracked that illusion wide open. In his penthouse office, Cole barked orders at his PR team. Fix it. I don't care how. Blame editing. Fake quotes. Whatever it takes. I want her quiet and the narrative reset by tomorrow. Sloane Avery lounged on the white leather couch behind him, scrolling through her iPhone, her red lips curved into a knowing smile. You're not going to kill the story by morning, Cole, she said lazily. You need a diversion. Give them something juicier. He turned to her, eyes cold. And what do you suggest? Sloane stood, sauntering toward him, perfume heavy in the air. Let's leak a few pictures, she whispered. Make it look like you've moved on. The press loves a redemption arc. Man betrayed by fragile wife finds strength in new love. It'll shift sympathy your way. Cole hesitated for only a second before nodding. Do it. That same afternoon, Natalie Cruz stormed into Grace's apartment holding a stack of papers. You're not going to believe this, she said, dropping them onto the coffee table. Grace, sitting cross-legged on the couch, looked up from her laptop. What now? Your husband's mistress, Natalie said sharply. She just signed a deal with a PR firm, Wexler Media. They're running a narrative campaign. Cole Harrington moves on from toxic marriage. They're releasing photos tomorrow. Grace's stomach tightened. Photos? Of him and Sloane at the Hamptons, supposedly last weekend. They want you to react, to post something emotional so they can paint you as unstable. Classic strategy. Grace stared at the wall. So they're turning me into the villain. Natalie nodded grimly. Exactly, but we can use this. The more public humiliation they generate, the stronger your case under Clause 12b. They think they're destroying you, but they're digging his grave. For a long moment, Grace said nothing. The baby kicked softly beneath her hand. She exhaled slowly. Then we stay quiet. Natalie frowned. You sure? Most women would want to fight back, sue, post receipts, drag them through hell. Grace shook her head. Not yet. Let them hang themselves with their own rope. The next morning, the photos hit every platform. Cole and Sloane laughing on a yacht near Montauk, champagne in hand, Sloane's hand on his chest. The headlines read, Billionaire finds solace after turbulent marriage. Grace watched the coverage from her couch, expression unreadable. Natalie sat beside her, muttering curses under her breath. Do you know what's funny? Grace said softly. That yacht, the Asterion, belongs to Harrington Capital. It's registered under the same holding company tied to my mother's trust. Natalie blinked. You're kidding. Grace smiled faintly. We don't need to post anything. They just handed us proof of misuse of company assets. Jasper's going to love this. That afternoon, she sent Jasper the screenshots and vessel registration details. His reply came within minutes. Perfect. This strengthens the claim tenfold. Meanwhile, Cole was on the phone with his lawyer, enraged. Why are the board members suddenly asking for a private review? Because someone's whispering about misused corporate funds, the lawyer said tightly. You need to tread carefully. Cole hung up, fury boiling beneath his calm surface. He didn't know Grace had already taken her first quiet step toward dismantling everything he built. As the world mocked her, Grace remained silent, because sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. And this time, she was learning to play his game better than he ever imagined. Snow had melted into a gray drizzle over Brooklyn when Grace took the train to visit her Aunt Lila. The studio smelled of paint, old film, and jasmine tea, the same smell Grace remembered from childhood. Framed photographs lined the brick walls, weddings, portraits, and candid shots of people mid-laughter. In every corner, there was life. Lila Monroe, tall and silver-haired, looked up from her camera and smiled softly. You look tired, sweetheart, she said, wiping her hands on a cloth, and thinner. Sit down before you fall over. Grace smiled weakly, lowering herself into a wooden chair. I've had better weeks. Lila poured her tea, then studied her niece with knowing eyes. It's about him, isn't it? Grace nodded. She told her everything. The gala, the humiliation, the leaked photos, and Jasper's call. When she finished, Lila sighed, eyes darkening. Your mother warned me this day might come. Grace frowned. What do you mean? Lila walked to an old cabinet and pulled out a small silver flash drive wrapped in a piece of velvet cloth. Evelyn gave this to me before she died. She said if Grace ever loses her way, give her this. It will remind her who she is. Grace took it carefully, as if holding something sacred. What's on it? Lila smiled faintly. Why don't you find out? They plugged the drive into Lila's iMac. A single video file appeared. For my daughter. Grace hesitated, then pressed play. The screen flickered, and there was her mother, younger than Grace remembered, sitting in a sunlit office surrounded by medical books and photos of smiling patients. Evelyn's voice was calm, filled with love. Grace, she began, if you're watching this, life has tested you in ways I hoped it wouldn't. I built my life helping others heal, but I knew I couldn't always protect you, so I built a safety net. Not just money, but truth. The world may try to measure your worth through men like Cole, powerful, charming, dangerous. But remember, you are not the shadow of his empire. You are the light he never understood. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Tears blurred the screen. Evelyn smiled gently in the video. And if you ever doubt yourself, look in the mirror. The woman you see isn't weak. She's my daughter, the strongest person I ever knew. The video ended with a soft chime, leaving the room quiet except for Grace's quiet sobs. Lila squeezed her shoulder. She knew, Grace. She knew you'd be tested by someone like him. That's why she tied the trust to morality, not profit. Grace wiped her eyes. She thought of everything. She believed in you, Lila said simply. They spent hours talking about Evelyn's courage, about love, about how power can twist good men into strangers. By evening, Grace felt something shift inside her. The grief that had lived in her chest for years began to melt into something sharper, purpose. Before leaving, Lila handed her a small box. Your mother's necklace, she said. She wore it the day she opened the clinic. She said it reminded her that healing always begins with pain. Grace clasped the silver chain around her neck. The pendant rested above her heart, cool against her skin. As she stepped out into the Brooklyn drizzle, she felt lighter, not healed, but anchored. Her reflection in a shop window caught her off guard. She almost didn't recognize herself. Her eyes looked older, clearer, alive. She took out her phone and texted Natalie. We move forward. No more waiting. Then she whispered into the misty air. Thank you, Mom. Grace didn't realize it yet, but that message, we move forward, would mark the moment her story shifted from survival to transformation. And this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. A week later, the city woke up to the sharp chill of February. Fifth Avenue glowed under a curtain of morning fog, turning glass towers into silver ghosts. Grace walked along the sidewalk, her coat buttoned to the top, scarf fluttering around her neck. She was heading toward the Plaza Hotel again. Not for revenge, not yet, but for evidence. Inside, everything looked exactly as it had the night of her humiliation. The same marble floors, the same chandeliers, the same faint smell of roses and champagne. Her heart tightened, but she didn't slow down. The hotel manager, Mr. Dawson, met her in the lobby, nervously adjusting his tie. Mrs. Harrington, he greeted, uncertain if the title still applied. I received your lawyer's request regarding the security footage from the gala. Just Grace, she corrected softly. And yes, I appreciate your cooperation. He led her to a quiet office behind the reception. The lights dimmed as he played the footage on a large screen. Grace watched herself appear, standing in the corner, hands over her stomach. Then Cole, laughing, Sloane beside him. The cruel words, the crowd's laughter. Every second replayed like a wound reopening. Can I get a copy? She asked quietly. Of course, Dawson said, lowering his voice. Between us, Mrs. Grace, many of us thought what he did was disgraceful. I'm glad someone's holding him accountable. She thanked him, taking the USB drive carefully. As she left the hotel, snowflakes began to fall again, melting as they touched the pavement. She walked toward the corner of Fifth Avenue, stopping by the Tiffany store. Inside the warm glow of crystal displays, she bought a small silver frame, a home for the sonogram photo of her baby, a reminder of why she was fighting. That afternoon, news broke that Cole and Sloane had been spotted together again, this time leaving Cartier. Paparazzi swarmed them, shouting questions about Grace. Cole smiled for the cameras. We wish her peace, he said smoothly, pulling Sloane closer. The photos hit social media within minutes. Natalie called instantly. He's escalating the PR war. I'm filing another cease and desist for defamation. Let him talk, Grace replied calmly. Every public word he says digs the hole deeper. The board won't like how reckless he's becoming. Later that evening, Grace received an email from Ethan Blackwell, the rival CEO she'd met briefly years ago. Saw what happened. Meet me tomorrow at the River Cafe. Private conversation, no press. Natalie frowned when Grace showed her the message. Ethan's not exactly known for altruism. Be careful. I will, Grace said, staring at the email. But maybe it's time I start understanding the battlefield. The next day, she met Ethan under the soft lights of the River Cafe, the Brooklyn Bridge arching above them like a guardian. Ethan was older than Cole, his sharp suit softened by the gentleness in his eyes. I won't waste your time, he began. Cole and I have competed for a decade. He's brilliant, but he's also arrogant, and arrogance leaves trails. If you want to take back what's yours, I can help. Grace studied him. Why would you help me? He smiled slightly. Because his downfall benefits me. But that doesn't mean it can't benefit you too. Grace didn't agree or refuse. She simply said, send what you have. When she left the cafe, the fog had thickened over the river. The city lights shimmered like embers under glass. She clutched the Tiffany bag against her chest, feeling both the weight and the clarity of what was coming. For the first time, Grace realized revenge wasn't just about anger, it was strategy. And as Fifth Avenue disappeared behind the fog, she understood. The war had already begun. By the next week, the scandal had begun to rot from the inside. Gossip blogs that once defended Cole started asking questions. Anonymous sources whispered about shady business ties, offshore accounts, and PR contracts signed under false names. Grace didn't post a single word, but her silence echoed louder than any press statement could. In her apartment, Grace sat by the window, sipping lukewarm tea as snowflakes melted against the glass. Natalie was across from her, laptop open, scrolling through leaked documents from a contact inside Wexler Media. You're not going to believe this, she said. The mistress, Sloan, was getting a cut from the PR campaign she ran against you. Literally paid to humiliate you. Grace arched an eyebrow, calm but cold. So she turned my pain into her paycheck. Pretty much, Natalie said, tapping the screen. And the money came from a corporate expense account tied directly to Harrington Capital. That means Cole used company funds for personal image management. Fraud, misuse of assets. Take your pick. Grace leaned back, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Every drop of arrogance leaves a trail, she murmured. Natalie smirked. You're quoting me now. They both laughed, a short, exhausted sound. It had been weeks since Grace had smiled at all. Meanwhile, Jasper was already working behind the scenes. He forwarded a confidential memo to Grace. Internal emails between Cole and the board showing how he tried to silence investors who questioned his reputation. This, Jasper wrote, is the kind of arrogance that brings empires down. Grace saved every file to a new folder labeled Reclaim. That evening, she decided to post something on social media for the first time since the gala. A single photo, her hand resting gently on her belly, the city skyline blurred behind her window. The caption read only, "The storm teaches the trees how to stand tall." The post exploded. Thousands of women flooded the comments with support, calling her brave, graceful, unstoppable. In 24 hours, her quiet message turned into a movement. Cole saw the post while sitting in his corner office overlooking Midtown. His jaw tightened. "Delete her account," he barked at his assistant. "She's not breaking any NDA, sir," the assistant said timidly. "It's just a quote." Cole slammed his fist on the desk. "She's manipulating sympathy. She knows exactly what she's doing." Across the city, Ethan Blackwell watched the same post from his office. A faint smile curved his lips. He sent Grace a brief text. When he gets desperate, he'll make mistakes. Be ready. Later that night, Grace couldn't sleep. She paced the apartment, the faint hum of traffic below soothing her nerves. For a moment, she wondered how she had survived the humiliation, the fear, the heartbreak, and realized it was because of something deeper than revenge. It was purpose. She sat down with her notebook and began to write. Plans for the Monroe Health Foundation revival, the clinics her mother dreamed of rebuilding, scholarships for women in medicine. This wasn't just about destroying Cole anymore. It was about reclaiming what he had tried to erase. When she finished, she closed the notebook and looked at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Cole was spinning lies. But lies, she knew, always leaked, drop by drop, until the truth flooded through the cracks. Grace didn't know exactly when the dam would break, but as the city slept, she could feel it building, the slow, unstoppable rise of truth. And when it came, she would be ready to drown his empire with it. The storm of silence surrounding Grace finally reached the marble floors of Harrington Capital. Inside the glass tower overlooking Park Avenue, whispers had turned into full-blown panic. Investors demanded answers. Journalists were camped outside the lobby, shouting questions about Cole's affair, the misuse of corporate funds, and the mysterious trust clause mentioned in leaked emails. Cole slammed the newspaper down on his desk. "Who the hell is leaking this?" He barked at his assistant. "No one knows, sir, but the board's requesting an emergency meeting on Friday. They said it's mandatory." Cole's face darkened. "Mandatory? They forget who built this company." Meanwhile, in a small cafe in Midtown, Jasper, Natalie, and Grace sat around a table littered with files and coffee cups. The faint sound of jazz filled the air, masking their conversation. "They're losing control of the narrative," Jasper said, adjusting his glasses. "The board members have reputations to protect, and two of them, Charles Landon and Victor Bell, were close to your mother, Grace. If they realize the trust clause is real, they'll demand a review." Grace stirred her tea slowly. "Do we have enough proof?" Natalie nodded. "We do now. Between the gala footage, the leaked PR invoices, and the yacht photos tied to company accounts, it's airtight. All we need is to file a formal notice with the board citing Clause 12B. Jasper slid an envelope across the table. "Already drafted. Once you sign, the trust becomes an active claimant." Grace stared at the paper. Her hand trembled slightly before she picked up the pen. "Once I sign this, there's no going back." Natalie leaned forward, voice steady. "You're not going back. You're going forward." Grace signed. Jasper exhaled in relief. "Then it begins." Across town, Ethan Blackwell received a call from one of the board members. "You were right," the man said quietly. "Harrington's been hiding financial irregularities. We're calling a closed-door session. Friday morning. No press." Ethan's eyes glinted. "Make sure Grace Monroe's name is on the agenda." That evening, Cole paced the length of his penthouse, phone pressed to his ear. "You can't be serious," he growled. "A review? Based on gossip?" "It's not gossip," replied Charles Landon's calm voice. "It's business, and the board needs reassurance you haven't compromised the company's integrity." Cole laughed bitterly. "Integrity? That's rich coming from a bunch of men who—" "Watch your tone," Landon interrupted. "Friday, 10 a.m. Park Avenue office. Don't be late." When the call ended, Cole threw his phone onto the couch, fury radiating from him. Sloane tried to soothe him, but he pushed her hand away. "She's behind this," he hissed. "Grace is pulling strings somehow." Sloane frowned. "She's pregnant, Cole. What could she possibly do?" He turned to the window, staring down at the city lights. "She's smarter than she looks. That's the problem." That same night, Grace couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, one hand on her belly, watching the snow fall. The baby kicked lightly, as if sensing the storm about to come. Natalie's message blinked on her phone. "Meeting confirmed. 10 a.m. Friday. You'll have a chance to speak if you want to." Grace typed back, "I'll be there." She looked at the Tiffany frame on the table, the sonogram photo glowing softly in the lamplight. "We're almost there," she whispered. In another part of the city, Jasper finalized the submission to the board's legal division. His email subject line read, "Notice of Activation, Monroe Health Trust, Clause 12B." As the email left his outbox, the dominoes began to fall. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, the board of Harrington Capital would no longer see Grace Monroe as a scandal. They would see her as a threat. Friday morning arrived cloaked in pale sunlight and tension. The streets of Manhattan gleamed with melted snow, reflecting the steel-gray sky above. Grace stepped out of a black town car in front of the Plaza Hotel, the very place where her humiliation began. But today, she wasn't here as Cole Harrington's broken wife. She was here as Grace Monroe, the woman about to reclaim everything he stole from her. Natalie met her at the entrance, holding a leather folder close to her chest. "You ready?" Grace adjusted her beige coat, the silver necklace her mother once wore glinting softly at her collarbone. "I've been ready since that night." Inside, the grand lobby buzzed with morning chatter, but Grace barely noticed. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked toward the security office. "Mr. Dawson, The hotel manager was waiting. He smiled nervously. "Miss Monroe," he greeted, handing her a small sealed envelope. "Here's your official copy of the gala footage, complete and unedited, as per your lawyer's request." Grace took it gently. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. You've helped more than you know." As she turned to leave, Dawson hesitated. "If I may say, that man doesn't deserve someone with your grace." Grace gave a faint, sad smile. "He doesn't deserve a lot of things." Outside, the winter wind whipped across Fifth Avenue. She paused, staring up at the gilded facade of the plaza. For a second, she saw the ghost of herself from that night, tears streaked, trembling, broken. Then in her mind, that image faded, replaced by the woman she was now. Calm, strong, composed. Natalie joined her at the curb. "We've got what we need. Jasper's already with the board at Park Avenue. They'll start the session in an hour." Grace nodded, slipping the USB drive into her bag. "Let's finish this." Before heading to the meeting, she made one brief stop, inside Tiffany & Co. The same shop she'd walked past the week before. She asked for a silver baby bracelet, engraved simply with the name Hope. The clerk wrapped it carefully. When she emerged, the air felt different, crisper, lighter. At Park Avenue, the boardroom loomed like a courtroom dressed in glass and gold. Reporters were gathered outside, sensing blood. Natalie guided Grace through the crowd, cameras flashing as someone shouted, "Miss Monroe, is it true you're suing your husband?" Grace didn't answer. She just kept walking, her head high. Inside, Jasper stood waiting beside the long conference table. Cole was already there, sitting at the head, jaw tight, eyes blazing. Sloane sat in the back, pretending to be invisible. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room as husband and wife locked eyes for the first time since the gala. Cole broke it with a cold laugh. "So this is what it's come to, my pregnant wife teaming up with my enemies." Grace's voice was calm. "No, Cole, this is me standing up for myself." Jasper placed the USB on the table. "Mr. Harrington, as counsel for the Monroe Health Trust, I'm submitting Exhibit A, the public recording from the Plaza Gala. It documents clear verbal humiliation and breach of the Trust's moral clause." The footage played. The room grew still. Cole's own laughter echoed through the speakers. She was just a charity project. One of the board members looked sick. Another shook his head. When the video ended, Grace rose slowly. "I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to reclaim what's mine, and my mother's." Her voice didn't tremble. The board members exchanged glances. Power was shifting, and everyone could feel it. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. The same hotel that once witnessed her humiliation was now the place where her rise began. Grace Monroe was no longer the woman in tears. She was the woman holding the truth. The following morning, the city was eerily quiet, as if Manhattan itself was holding its breath. The headlines screamed her name. Grace Monroe stands against billionaire husband in corporate showdown. Overnight, the video from the plaza had gone viral. Every news channel, talk show, and online forum was dissecting the footage, the insult, and the woman who didn't flinch when facing the man who once owned her world. Grace sat by the window of Natalie's apartment, a cup of peppermint tea steaming beside her. She had spent the night there, too wary to return home. On the table lay stacks of legal folders, each one a weapon forged from the truth. Natalie emerged from the bedroom, already dressed in a crisp navy suit. "We have 1 hour before the board reconvenes. Cole's people are trying to stall, saying the footage is manipulated." Grace let out a breath. "Let them try. The original file's time-stamped and authenticated." Natalie grinned. "Exactly. We're airtight." Grace stood and went to the mirror by the door. Her reflection startled her. Gone was the timid woman who once trembled in gala lights. Her hair was neatly tied back, her makeup simple but precise. She wore a cream-colored maternity suit, soft, elegant, but strong. Her mother's silver necklace caught the light at her collarbone. Natalie watched her. "You look powerful." Grace smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I ever wanted power. I just wanted peace." "Sometimes," Natalie said, "they come together." Downstairs, a black Mercedes waited, loaned by Ethan Blackwell's assistant. Grace hesitated before getting in. "Why is Ethan helping us?" she asked quietly. Natalie shrugged. "Maybe he sees justice as good business, or maybe he just hates Cole more than we do." Grace looked out the window as they drove down Park Avenue. The skyscrapers blurred into light and shadow. For the first time in months, she didn't feel fear clawing at her chest. She felt grounded. When they arrived at Harrington Capital's headquarters, security guards greeted her with a mix of awe and awkward respect. Grace walked past them without a word, head high. Inside the elevator, Natalie adjusted her blazer. "Remember what Jasper said? Speak little, say only what matters." Grace nodded. "He's not my husband anymore. He's just a man in a suit." The elevator doors opened. The boardroom was quieter than yesterday. Cole was already there, pale and furious, flanked by two attorneys. Sloan was gone. Only his anger remained. Jasper gave Grace a reassuring nod. "You're doing great," he murmured. The meeting began with formalities, but tension hung thick in the air. Cole's lawyer spoke first. "We move to dismiss this claim as invalid. The moral clause is ambiguous, outdated," Jasper interrupted smoothly. "The clause is valid under New York contract law, and the humiliation was public. You can debate morality, but not video evidence." Cole clenched his fists, glaring at Grace. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Grace met his gaze calmly. "You once told me I represent you. Maybe I still do, but this time I represent the part you lost." Her words landed like a blade. One of the older board members cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington, given the public backlash and evidence, we propose a temporary suspension pending review." Cole slammed his hand on the table. "You can't do this to me." Grace stood. "They're not doing it to you, Cole. You did it to yourself." The vote was called. One by one, hands rose around the table. Jasper leaned over to Grace, voice barely above a whisper. "You just witnessed the beginning of the end." As she left the room, the flash of cameras from the lobby below flickered like lightning, but for the first time, Grace didn't hide from the light. It felt like armor. Quiet. Unbreakable. That evening, Cole Harrington returned to the penthouse on Park Avenue. A place that once symbolized control, now echoing with emptiness. The city lights glittered outside like 1,000 eyes watching him fall. His reflection in the glass looked older, angrier. Every headline, every whisper in the financial district repeated the same message. Grace Monroe had won the public's heart, and maybe soon, his company. He loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, and turned on the TV. Her face filled the screen, graceful, calm, poised. A news anchor said, "Grace Monroe's quiet strength has ignited a national conversation about dignity and justice in marriage." Cole threw the glass against the wall. It shattered, whiskey dripping down the marble like tears. His phone buzzed. Sloan. He answered, voice sharp. "What?" "Don't talk to me like that," Sloan snapped. "The PR firms dropped me. The tabloids are calling me the homewrecker of the year, and you promised me protection." "I promised nothing," he said coldly. "You were useful until you weren't." "You think you can just erase me?" she hissed. "I have emails, Cole. Messages. Proof that you—" "Don't threaten me," he interrupted. "You'd go down with me." But Sloan's silence on the other end chilled him. "Try me," she whispered, then hung up. Cole stood there, gripping the phone. For the first time, he felt a flicker of fear. Across town, Grace sat in her small Queens apartment, her hands resting on her belly as she listened to the steady hum of the radiator. The world outside was chaos, but inside everything was still. Natalie sat opposite her, scrolling through her iPad. "Cole's losing control," she said. "Half the board's backing your temporary claim. They're scared he'll sink the company." Grace nodded. "He'll try something desperate soon. He always does when he feels cornered." Natalie looked up. "What will you do when you have full control of his shares?" Grace hesitated, her voice soft but steady. "I'll rebuild the foundation, rename it Monroe Health Initiative. My mother's dream deserves better than his greed." Natalie smiled. "You know, this whole thing started as revenge. But now, it's evolution." Grace exhaled. "Revenge ends when you heal." Later that night, she walked through the penthouse one last time. She had asked the property manager to let her in for a final visit before Cole's legal team froze her access. The place was silent, too perfect. Every piece of furniture positioned to impress, not comfort. Her fingers brushed the cold marble countertop where Cole once left his watch, the one she had given him as a wedding gift. She walked into the bedroom, stopping at the closet door. The faint smell of his cologne lingered, a mix of cedar and betrayal. She opened a drawer and found an envelope tucked behind a box of cufflinks. Inside was a photo of their wedding day. On the back, in his handwriting, were 3 words, "My perfect choice." She didn't cry. She simply tore the photo in half and whispered, "Your choice, my freedom." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow. She took one last look around and then closed the door behind her. As she stepped into the elevator, her phone buzzed. "Jasper, the board meets tomorrow. Be ready, he's angry and dangerous." Grace replied, "I'm not afraid anymore." Above her, the penthouse lights flickered, reflecting off the falling snow. Inside, Cole stood alone, replaying every mistake he'd made, unaware that the woman he'd underestimated had already taken the first step toward burying his empire for good. By the next sunrise, the battle would no longer be just about money or reputation. It would be about survival. And Grace was done losing. Friday morning broke with a muted sky over Manhattan, a strange calm before the inevitable storm. The kind of day where even the air seemed to wait. Grace stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the fabric of her cream maternity suit. Her belly had grown heavier, but so had her resolve. Today wasn't just another meeting, it was the day she would stare down everything that once terrified her. Natalie arrived exactly on time, holding a black folder and a cup of Starbucks coffee. "2 shots of courage," she said, handing it to Grace with a smile. Grace took a sip. "Do you ever get scared?" "Every day," Natalie replied. "But scared people can still win. We just do it shaking." They both laughed softly, the sound brittle but real. Outside, the black Mercedes was waiting. As they drove down Park Avenue, Grace watched the city blur past. The polished windows, the strangers hurrying by, the distant skyline that had witnessed her pain and now her rise. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jasper. "Everything is set. Just breathe." At Harrington Capital's lobby, cameras waited behind the rope lines. Reporters shouted her name, their flashes slicing through the morning air. "Miss Monroe, are you taking over the company? Are the rumors true?" Grace didn't respond. She walked straight through, her chin lifted, the hum of whispers following her like a tide. Natalie leaned in, head high, eyes forward. "He's waiting for you to break." The elevator doors opened with a chime. Grace and Natalie stepped in. As the car began to rise, the numbers above the door ticked upward. 12, 18, 27, each one echoing the heartbeat in her ears. Grace's reflection stared back from the mirrored walls, steady, composed, unreadable. At floor 41, she exhaled slowly. "You know," she murmured, "he used to count these floors when he first started here. Said one day he'd own the whole skyline." Natalie raised an eyebrow. Maybe he forgot that skylines can collapse. The elevator stopped. A security guard held the door open. "Board meeting on 42. They're expecting you, Miss Monroe." Grace stepped out. The hallway was silent except for the faint click of her heels on marble. The boardroom doors loomed ahead, tall, glass, and cold. She could see silhouettes moving inside. Cole was pacing. Jasper met her at the entrance. "Remember," he whispered, "you don't need to prove emotion, just truth." Grace nodded and pushed open the doors. Every head turned. Cole froze mid-step, jaw tight, eyes like sharpened steel. "So you actually came," he said with mock amusement. "I always keep my promises," Grace replied. She took her seat across from him. Natalie placed the folder on the table, opening to the first page. Financial misconduct, misuse of corporate funds, breach of the trust clause. Every accusation precise, documented, undeniable. Cole's lawyer objected, sputtering legal jargon, but Jasper countered every line calmly. The room felt charged, like static before lightning. As the debate escalated, Grace stayed silent, her hands folded gently over her stomach. When Cole tried to speak over Jasper, she finally looked up. "You've talked over everyone for years, Cole. Not today." Her voice was soft, but it cut like glass. The board fell silent. A light snow began to fall outside the windows, the skyline blurred in white. Cole's anger simmered, but underneath it, fear had finally taken root. When the meeting adjourned for recess, Grace rose first. She walked to the elevator, her reflection catching the snowy light. She pressed the button and watched the numbers descend. 42, 27, 18, each one counting down not to her fear, but to his downfall. When the board reconvened after recess, the air inside the glass-walled conference room was so tense it could have cracked. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the city drenched in a ghostly white light. Grace took her seat again, every movement deliberate, calm, precise. Across from her, Cole adjusted his cufflinks, his composure returning like armor sliding back into place. "Let's make this simple," he said coolly, addressing the board. "This," he gestured toward Grace, "is a personal dispute. My wife is emotional. manipulated by opportunists trying to weaken our company. His words oozed confidence, the same tone he had once used to charm investors and silence competitors. But this time, the room wasn't buying it. Jasper folded his hands, voice even. "Mr. Harrington, personal or not, the damage is public. Every major media outlet has covered your comments, your affair, and the PR funds used for private image repair. The clause exists for precisely this scenario." Cole leaned back, smirking. "You're reaching. This so-called clause was written by a dead woman decades ago. It doesn't apply to a modern corporation." Natalie clicked her pen. "Actually, it does," she said sharply. "New York contract law recognizes moral clauses as binding if tied to fiduciary conduct. Clause 12B is crystal clear. You breached both moral and financial integrity." Cole's smirk faltered for half a second. One of the older board members, Victor Bell, cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington, regardless of personal details, these allegations raise ethical concerns for shareholders. We must consider public perception." Cole forced a laugh. "You're going to let gossip dictate billion-dollar decisions?" Grace finally spoke. "You did." Her voice was soft but steady. Every eye turned to her. "You built your empire on perception, Cole. Every gala, every interview, every curated headline. But perception only works when people believe in the man behind it. And after what you said, after what you did, no one believes anymore." Cole's jaw tightened. "You think you can lecture me about power? You lived off my money." Grace looked him straight in the eyes. "No, Cole. I lived through your cruelty. There's a difference." The silence that followed was electric. Even the air felt charged. Natalie slid a printed report across the table. "For the record, here's documentation of unauthorized transfers from Harrington Capital's PR fund to a personal account under Sloan Avery's name. That's corporate fraud, not gossip." Cole's lawyer paled. "We'll need to review." Victor Bell cut him off. "No. We've seen enough." He turned to Jasper. "Mr. Flint, please read the clause aloud." Jasper opened the folder, his voice steady as stone. Clause 12B. In the event that the spouse of the trust's beneficiary engages in public conduct resulting in humiliation, defamation, or measurable harm, the Monroe Health Trust reserves the right to reclaim and assume operational control of all associated shares. Cole's face drained of color. "You can't do this." Grace stood. "I already did." Jasper handed over the signed documents from the previous day. "The clause is now active, and the trust holds 22% controlling shares, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the room. Cole's fury erupted. "You think you've won, Grace? You have no idea what this world will do to you." Grace met his glare calmly. "I don't need the world, Cole. I just need the truth, and I already have it." The meeting ended in chaos, attorneys whispering, board members exchanging wary glances, Cole storming out as cameras outside flashed like lightning. Grace stayed seated for a moment, letting the noise fade. Then she smiled faintly. The kind of smile that hid 1,000 battles and one quiet victory. For the first time, power didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like balance. And in that balance, Grace Monroe found her peace. The following day, the legal storm exploded across Manhattan. The New York Times headline read, "Monroe Trust activates moral clause. Billionaire faces power shift." Financial news tickers on Wall Street buzzed with the story. Stocks dipped, analysts speculated, and inside the high towers of corporate Manhattan, everyone whispered one question: how did the wife outsmart the empire? Grace watched the coverage from Jasper's office, her hands folded calmly over her belly. The city roared outside, but she was still. Natalie paced near the window, her phone buzzing nonstop. "Every outlet wants a statement," she said, "but silence is working for us. The mystery makes them nervous." Jasper nodded. "We hold our ground. The documents are airtight. The clause isn't just symbolic, it's binding law." Grace looked down at the original trust papers spread before her. The ink had faded slightly with age, but the words were clear. "If ever betrayed in spirit or in name, my daughter shall inherit not only my wealth, but my right to dignity." Her mother's handwriting, elegant and steady, seemed to whisper from another time. "She knew this could happen," Grace murmured. "She planned it to the last detail." Jasper smiled. Evelyn Monroe was a visionary. She didn't just raise a daughter, she built a legacy that protects her. The office door opened and an assistant announced, "Mr. Harrington's counsel just filed an appeal. They're arguing the clause violates corporate independence." Natalie rolled her eyes. "Of course they are. When men lose power, they call it unfair. Grace stayed silent for a moment, then said softly, "Let them. Every time they push back, they prove exactly why this clause exists." Meanwhile, across the city, Cole sat in his penthouse surrounded by chaos. Reporters gathered outside, his phone buzzed with missed calls, and his lawyer's tone had turned icy. "You're running out of allies, Cole. The board's voting to freeze your decision-making power until the investigation ends." Cole slammed his fist against the desk. "That woman is destroying everything I built." His lawyer hesitated. "She's not destroying it, sir. She's reclaiming what was hers all along." For once, Cole had no answer. Back in Jasper's office, Grace prepared for the next meeting, a final review with the board to confirm the clause's activation. She wore a dark gray dress, understated yet commanding. Natalie helped her adjust her jacket. "You're shaking," she whispered. Grace smiled faintly. "I'm not scared, just ready." When they arrived at the boardroom, the atmosphere was electric. Cole was already there, surrounded by lawyers, his face pale from exhaustion. Cameras flashed outside the frosted glass as reporters tried to catch glimpses. Jasper began the session. As per Clause 12b, and based on verifiable evidence of public humiliation, breach of moral conduct, and misuse of company assets, the Monroe Health Trust assumes partial control of Harrington Capital. One of the senior members asked, "Does Mrs. Monroe intend to interfere with company operations?" Grace stood, her voice even. "No. I intend to rebuild its integrity. This company once represented innovation and trust. I want it to mean that again." Cole laughed bitterly. "Don't pretend you care about integrity. This is revenge, Grace." She met his eyes. "Revenge is what you expected. Redemption is what you never saw coming." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Victor Bell, the oldest member of the board, said, "Motion carried, effective immediately." Cole's lawyer whispered something frantic, but it was too late. The decision was final. The empire had shifted. Grace exhaled, her hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked softly, as if sensing her calm. As she walked out of the boardroom, flashbulbs exploded like thunder. But Grace didn't flinch. The clause wasn't just a contract anymore. It was her mother's voice, echoing through justice. And now, it was Grace's turn to speak for herself. Monday morning dawned gray over Manhattan, the kind of colorless sky that made the whole city look like a courtroom. Inside Harrington Capital's main tower, tension buzzed through the air like static before a storm. The boardroom was filled once again. Lawyers, executives, and press consultants pretending calm while watching a power structure collapse in real time. Grace entered quietly, escorted by Natalie and Jasper. Her heels clicked against the polished marble floor. Every eye turned toward her, but she didn't waver. She had learned that silence could command more attention than fury ever could. Cole was already there, pale and furious, his once flawless suit slightly wrinkled. He didn't look like a billionaire today. He looked like a man cornered. The chairman, Victor Bell, cleared his throat. "This meeting concerns the leadership and stability of Harrington Capital. The recent activation of the Monroe Health Trust has raised questions regarding Mr. Harrington's ability to serve as CEO." Cole immediately stood. "This is absurd. I built this company. Without me, there is no Harrington Capital." Jasper responded calmly, "And yet, without the Monroe Trust, there would have been no initial funding to build it." Murmurs spread around the table. Grace watched Cole's face tighten. He wasn't used to being reminded of where his empire began, or who helped him build it. Victor continued, "Given the current public backlash, investor withdrawals, and confirmed breaches of company ethics, the board must consider whether continued leadership under Mr. Harrington is viable." Cole slammed his palm on the table. "You're all cowards. You'd sell your souls to the press for approval." Grace's voice cut through the chaos, calm but piercing. "No one sold their souls, Cole. They're just done renting them to you." For a moment, the room froze. Even Cole's attorney fell silent. Victor nodded toward the secretary. "Very well, the motion is clear. A vote of no confidence in Mr. Cole Harrington's leadership, effective immediately if passed by majority." The secretary distributed cards. The sound of pens scratching paper filled the air. Cole stood rigid, breathing hard, his gaze locked on Grace. "You think you've won," he whispered. "You'll never survive in this world without me." Grace met his stare steadily. "Watch me." One by one, the cards were collected, tallied, and handed to Victor. He read them slowly, his voice even. 7 in favor, 5 against, the motion passes. The room erupted. Some in shock, some in relief. Cole's lawyer whispered something urgent, but he didn't hear it. His world had gone silent except for the sound of his own defeat. Victor spoke again. Effective immediately, Mr. Harrington is suspended from all executive duties pending full review. Interim leadership will be assumed by the board under trust oversight. Cole looked around, desperate for support, but no one met his eyes. Finally, he turned to Grace. You think this makes you noble? You're destroying the company out of spite. Grace rose slowly. I'm not destroying anything. I'm cleaning up what you left behind. Security entered discreetly as protocol demanded. Cole's face twisted with rage. This isn't over, Grace, he shouted as they let him out. Grace didn't answer. She only straightened her shoulders, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. The room's tension began to ease. It was over. Natalie leaned close and whispered, You did it? Grace shook her head gently. No, we just started something better. As they stepped out into the hallway, reporters swarmed like bees outside the glass doors. Flashbulbs erupted, questions flying. Grace paused just long enough to look back at the boardroom, the battlefield she'd just conquered. The vote had ended his reign, but for Grace, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding from the ashes and proving that dignity could be louder than power. The week after the vote, Manhattan moved at its usual restless pace. But for Grace Monroe, time had slowed. The storm was over, yet she could still hear its echo in every headline, every hushed conversation about the woman who took down her billionaire husband. The office on Park Avenue that once belonged to Cole was now hers, temporarily at least. The board had offered her a seat as interim trustee of the Monroe Health Trust's 22% controlling shares, a role that gave her both authority and responsibility. But instead of basking in victory, Grace spent her first morning staring at the skyline through the glass wall, coffee cooling beside her untouched. Ethan Blackwell entered quietly. You're early, he said. I didn't sleep much, Grace replied without turning. Too many things to fix. He smiled faintly. You sound like a CEO already. Grace looked over at him. I don't want to be Cole, she said. I want to undo what he became. Ethan took a seat across from her, setting down a folder. Then start with this. These are reports of canceled charity programs Cole froze when he shifted funding to luxury branding. Half of them were medical initiatives tied to your mother's foundation. Grace opened the folder, scanning the pages. Each report felt like a bruise reopening. He shut down the clinics, she whispered. He didn't see profit in compassion, Ethan said quietly. But maybe you do. Grace met his gaze. I do. By noon, she had already drafted a proposal, a reallocation of dividends from the trust's earnings into a revived project, the Monroe Health Initiative, mobile clinics serving underfunded communities across New York. Natalie reviewed the draft later that afternoon. It's bold, she said. It'll make investors nervous. Good, Grace replied. Let them remember what this company was supposed to stand for. Across town, Cole sat alone in a rented office space, watching the news coverage. His phone vibrated constantly. Calls from investors, lawyers, and Sloan, all ignored. The screen flashed with Grace's name on another headline. Monroe Trust announces health initiative for mothers and children. Cole's jaw clenched. He turned off the TV. She's using my name to rebuild her saintly image, he muttered. His lawyer, sitting across from him, said carefully, Actually, sir, she's using her name, the Monroe name. Cole threw him a look sharp enough to cut glass. Don't forget who gave her power. The lawyer hesitated. Respectfully, Mr. Harrington, she took it. Meanwhile, Grace held her first internal meeting. The board members listened as she outlined her plan. She didn't raise her voice or flaunt her victory. Instead, she spoke with quiet conviction. This company was born from investment, yes, but it will survive through integrity. Profit doesn't have to replace purpose. My mother believed wealth meant responsibility. I believe that too. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Victor Bell, the oldest board member, said, You remind me of your mother, Miss Monroe. Perhaps this company has a future after all. That night, Grace returned home to Queens. She kicked off her heels, made a simple dinner, and sat by the window with a notebook. Outside, the city glittered like a promise kept. She wrote a single line. Power is only real when it heals, not when it hurts. Her phone buzzed. An email from Ethan. The media's shifting focus. You're winning them over. Grace smiled. I'm not trying to win them, she murmured to herself. I'm trying to win me back. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby's soft flutter beneath her palm. The fight had taken so much, but for the first time she understood what her mother had meant when she wrote that clause. It wasn't about punishment. It was about legacy. Grace Monroe finally knew what power was for, and she intended to use it not to conquer, but to heal. The snow outside had turned into cold spring rain by the time Grace returned to the penthouse. It was the first time she'd stepped foot there since the night of her humiliation. The security guard held the door open politely, but his eyes said everything. Everyone knew the story now. The place smelled the same: faint whiskey, expensive cologne, and silence. But it no longer belonged to him. Under the legal settlement, Grace had reclaimed it as part of her share in the trust. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was standing in the ruins of his empire. Yet for the first time, she felt like she could finally breathe. She walked through the grand living room, touching the back of the leather sofa, the cold marble counters, the grand piano he never played. Every object seemed to hold an echo of the woman she used to be. She paused in front of a tall mirror by the window. The same mirror where she had once checked her makeup before attending galas at his side. Now the woman staring back was different, stronger, wiser, untouchable. The doorbell rang. Natalie stepped in, carrying a file folder and 2 cups of coffee. "Place hasn't changed much," she said, looking around. "Just me," Grace replied softly. Natalie handed her the coffee. "Cole's legal team sent another letter. He's threatening to sue the trust for defamation and emotional distress." Grace arched an eyebrow. "Emotional distress? That's rich." "I know," Natalie said, smirking. "Jasper already drafted a response. Basically, we're bulletproof." Grace nodded, taking a sip of her drink. "Let him shout into the void. I'm done reacting to his noise." They sat for a moment in comfortable silence, the city glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then Natalie said, "You know, most people in your position would sell this place, run off to the Hamptons, and start over." Grace shook her head. "No, running is what he expects. I'd rather rebuild right where I fell." Natalie smiled. "That sounds like closure." "Not closure," Grace corrected. "Reclamation." Later that evening, after Natalie left, Grace wandered into Cole's old study. Papers still littered the desk, contracts, notes, and one framed photo of them at their wedding. She stared at it for a long time before opening the drawer beneath it. Inside lay his Mont Blanc pen, the same one he'd used to sign every major deal. She picked it up, rolling it between her fingers. "You built empires with this," she murmured, "and destroyed yourself in the process." Setting it aside, she took out her own notebook, the same one she'd used to outline the Monroe Health Initiative. On the first blank page, she wrote a quote her mother used to say: "Forgiveness isn't surrender, it's freedom." Outside, thunder rolled over the skyline, and for a moment the lights flickered. Grace stood by the window, watching lightning dance above the city. The storm no longer frightened her. It felt like a reflection of her own strength, wild, unpredictable, cleansing. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name on the screen. She answered. "I heard about Cole's latest stunt," he said. "Do you need help managing the fallout?" Grace smiled faintly. "No, Ethan. For once, I think I can handle the storm myself." He paused, then said softly, "Your mother would be proud." After hanging up, Grace looked back at the mirror. For the first time, she didn't see a victim or a survivor. She saw a leader. The storm outside raged through the night, but Grace didn't flinch. She had learned that some storms don't come to break you. They come to wash everything clean. Spring swept across Manhattan like a soft sigh, washing away the gray of winter. It had been 3 months since the board's vote, 3 months since Grace Monroe had turned scandal into strength. Now the Plaza Hotel shimmered once more under 1,000 golden lights, preparing to host another gala. But this time, the name on every invitation wasn't Harrington Capital. It was the Monroe Health Initiative. Grace stood backstage, adjusting the simple diamond pin on her gown. She wore white, not as a symbol of purity, but of peace. Her baby bump was now unmistakable, framed gracefully beneath the silk fabric. Natalie fussed with her notes beside her. "You realize the irony, right?" she said with a grin. "You're back at the same place he destroyed you." Grace smiled faintly. "That's why it matters. Pain isn't the end of a story. It's the proof you lived through it. Outside, hundreds of guests filled the ballroom. Investors, doctors, philanthropists, and journalists. Among them sat Victor Bell, Jasper Flint, and even Ethan Blackwell, who had personally donated $1 million to her cause. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. When the lights dimmed, the MC's voice echoed through the hall. Please welcome the founder of the Monroe Health Initiative, Ms. Grace Monroe. Applause thundered. Grace stepped into the spotlight, her heels steady on the stage where she had once stood broken. 3 months ago, she began, her voice warm yet firm. I stood in this very ballroom, humiliated in front of the world. That night, I thought I had lost everything, my dignity, my marriage, my purpose. But I was wrong. Sometimes you have to lose what you thought defined you to discover who you truly are. The room was silent except for the soft clicks of cameras. My mother, Evelyn Monroe, built her life on compassion. She believed medicine wasn't just about curing illness. It was about restoring humanity. Tonight, in her honor, we're reopening the Monroe Clinics, free healthcare centers for mothers and children across New York. This isn't a revenge story, it's a rebirth. Applause rose again, some people even standing. Natalie, in the front row, wiped her eyes. As Grace continued her speech, Cole Harrington watched from the shadows near the exit. He wasn't invited, but he had come anyway. His once perfect suit hung looser, his expression hardened by pride and regret. When Grace finished, the audience stood in ovation. She smiled, tears glimmering under the lights. For a fleeting moment, her gaze met Cole's across the room. Neither spoke, but everything that needed to be said lived in that silence. After the speech, Ethan approached her, offering a glass of sparkling water. You just made history, he said. Grace smiled. No, I just reminded people what integrity sounds like. Reporters swarmed around her for interviews, flashbulbs bursting like fireworks. But this time, she wasn't the woman being pitied. She was the woman being celebrated. Later, as the gala drew to a close, Grace slipped out to the balcony overlooking Central Park. The night air was cool and quiet. She felt the baby kick gently, and she laughed softly. We did it, she whispered. Natalie joined her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. You know, she said, you could easily walk away from all this now. Live a quiet life. No one would blame you. Grace looked at the glittering skyline, then at the reflection of the plaza's chandeliers on the glass. I don't want to walk away. I want to build something that outlives me, something my child can be proud of. Below them, New York shimmered like 1,000 promises kept. The same city that had once witnessed her fall now stood witness to her rise, and this time, the applause wasn't for her pain, but for her purpose. A month after the gala, the city had shifted. The tabloids that once tore Grace apart now praised her transformation. Headlines read, Grace Monroe turns scandal into legacy. Her name had become more than a story, it was a symbol. For women who had been silenced, for those who had been humiliated and told to stay quiet. The Monroe Health Initiative opened its first clinic on a quiet corner in Brooklyn, just blocks from where her mother once ran her practice. Grace stood in front of the glass doors, the same silver necklace around her neck, a soft breeze playing with her hair. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was simple, humble, just doctors, volunteers, and community families. Natalie stood beside her, camera in hand. Smile, boss lady, she said. This one's going to the Times. Grace laughed. You still call me that? Always. You earned it. As the ribbon fell and applause erupted, Grace felt a warmth rise in her chest. She looked at the sign above the clinic door, the Evelyn Monroe Center for Maternal Care. Her mother's name finally had a home again. After the ceremony, a little girl tugged on Grace's sleeve. Are you the lady who helps moms? Grace knelt down, smiling. That's the plan, sweetheart. The girl's mother, teary-eyed, whispered, You don't know what this means to people like us. Thank you. Grace squeezed her hand. You're welcome. But thank my mom too, this was her dream. Later that afternoon, Grace returned to her office. She stood by the window overlooking the city that had once chewed her up and now seemed to hum with quiet respect. On her desk sat the old Mont Blanc pen she'd found in Cole's study. She had kept it, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what unchecked power looked like. Her phone buzzed, an incoming message from an unknown number. It read, You did it. I hope you're proud, C. Grace stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, I am. I hope one day you find peace too. She pressed send, then set the phone down and exhaled. No anger, no satisfaction, just closure. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Jasper entered, his face softer than usual. The clinic's launch was a success. Your mother would be proud. Grace smiled. I think she already knows. He nodded. You've come a long way from that night at the plaza. Grace looked out the window, her hand resting gently on her belly. That night ended one story, but it also started another. I thought my life ended when he humiliated me. Turns out, it just began. That evening, she visited her mother's grave at Greenwood Cemetery. The sky was painted in pink and gold. She placed a single white rose beside the headstone. Mom, she whispered, you were right. Dignity isn't something someone gives you. It's something you reclaim when they try to take it away. A gentle breeze brushed against her cheek. For a moment, she swore she could feel her mother's presence, quiet and proud. As she walked back toward her car, the city lights began to flicker on in the distance. Each one glowed like a small promise, of healing, of justice, of hope. Grace smiled to herself, whispering, we made it. The baby kicked softly in response, and she laughed. The world had once watched her break, but now it would watch her build. And in that soft New York twilight, Grace Monroe finally understood. Power wasn't revenge. Power was light, and she had become her own sunrise. Trelevit content trio view king Eldanoi. So, that's how our story ends, my dear friends. You're still here, aren't you? If you've stayed with Grace until this moment, then something in her journey must have touched your heart. Maybe because, deep down, we've all been her at some point. We've all faced humiliation, heartbreak, or loss and wondered if we'd ever rise again. But as the Stoics remind us, the obstacle is the way. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Grace's story isn't about revenge or wealth. It's about reclaiming peace, dignity, and light after darkness. It's about turning pain into power and power into purpose. Maybe tonight that's what you need to remember too, that no one can take your worth unless you hand it to them. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means facing the storm until you become the calm inside it. If this story moved you even a little, leave a like, share it with someone who needs strength tonight, and don't forget to subscribe, because here we don't just tell stories, we heal through them together.